Hi, this is Derek Murphy. I'm standing outside this castle in Rapotenstein, Austria. We rented this castle actually for Nanowrimo. So we're here for 2 weeks working on our book projects. It's pretty early. Well, for me it's early. It's like 11, but there's still frost on the ground. And this video I'm going to talk about how to start and end a chapter. And while I talk about that, I'm going to be walking back up to the castle because it's kind of cold out here, and I'm going to do a castle tour once I get up to the top. And it's kind of quite a hike actually to get up to the inside area, so you can kind of see what that looks like as I go. So the reason that I want to make this video about starting and ending a chapter is because for my Nanowrimo project, I'm doing things a little bit differently. I should be just focused on my 50k word count and writing new content, but actually what I want to do is write a really good book that I can publish in December. So I've had kind of some notes of a project I started last year. I had about 5 chapters already, and rather than just continue and finish the book, I've been going back and really finishing those 5 chapters because the beginning of the book is so important, and if people don't read and enjoy the first few chapters of the book, nothing else really matters. And also, my first 5 chapters, they were okay, but they weren't really good enough. I didn't have enough conflict. So one of the things I've done is gone back and added in a lot of conflict and motivation. Oops, make sure this door is locked. So a lot of conflict and motivation for my characters, a lot of cross-character motivation, which means they have different wants and goals, so even if they're best friends or relatives, they're going to come in conflict with each other. I added a lot of backstory about where my character comes from and where she gets her powers from. But one of the things I noticed that was coming up again and again is that the beginning and the ending of my chapters were very weak, and a mistake I see a lot of writers doing. I'll show you quickly. This is the castle behind me. We're kind of in the inside area now. So we're inside the walled gates, and we have this whole place to ourselves, which is crazy. There's some alpaca down here in our garden. I was just down chatting with them. It's an amazing view with all this pine trees and scenery. So that's really inspiring for my story, which is kind of a vampire royalty story. So beginning and ending chapters, what a lot of writers will do, especially more first-time writers, and something I noticed in my first 5 chapters was one chapter was one day, and at the end of the day the character goes to sleep thinking about what happened, and at the beginning of the next day the character wakes up, and that's the beginning of the chapter. That's something you really don't want to repeat, especially several times in a row. You don't want every chapter to start off waking up and end going to sleep. Instead of doing that, what you really want to do is start and end with the action. So you start with whatever happens that day, whatever, like right before the pivotal scene where things change or things happen. Every scene needs to introduce something new to the plot. There's usually a balance between action scenes and reflection scenes, which means something crazy can happen, and then there's a slower period where they reflect and they plan. Basically, something happens which changes what they need to do. It changes their own responses, so they have to plan what they are going to respond with now that there's this new event or new information, and then they'll take another action, they'll be thwarted, and it'll continue that way. It's kind of like Hegel's thesis, hypothesis, antithesis. Anyway, here's kind of the middle area. There's also where we're parking. See the castle behind me, tower. So instead of just starting your chapters with, she got up in the morning and she ate breakfast and she got dressed, you can start a couple chapters that way, but you really want to avoid the habit of doing it for every chapter. Instead, skip through getting up, waking up, breakfast, and skip straight to just before the action. And then when you end the chapter, you kind of want to end on a cliffhanger. You want them to be able to just, like, they have to keep reading and find out what happens next. So you start off a chapter just before shit hits the fan or something terrible happens or something changes. There's some conflict, there's some build-up, but then hopefully just before the end of the chapter, something crazy will happen. For example, I just went back, I finished editing my 5 chapters of the book I'm working on, so now I can start writing new content. She gets picked up by her she gets picked up from her village by the elite vampire she's supposed to marry. And then on the way to the Citadel of Lights, they get attacked by werewolves, basically. So the car gets flipped over and werewolves attack, and that's where I end my chapter. So that's kind of my point. Here are some horse-drawn carriages. It's an older section of the castle. It's still kind of a hike to get up here. So that was kind of my point of this video, was just something I noticed in my own writing that I think a lot of first-time writers, a mistake that a lot of people make, is just not knowing where to start and end their chapters. And also, I mean, like I said, I'm going back and really making these 5 chapters really strong because otherwise it would take a lot of revision and fixing and tweaking. And if I hadn't set everything up properly in these first 5 chapters, most of what I wrote would have been a mistake because I would have had to change everything later once I went back and added all these extra details that made my first 5 chapters much stronger. So I don't necessarily recommend doing this because I think it's important to get through the first draft and then make it stronger. On the other hand, if you really want to make a good book that sells, like I've done several books that I think are reasonably good, they're good enough, they earn some money. But if you really want an amazing book that's to the next level, which earns more money long-term, you've got to make it stronger. So rather than just getting through the content and getting to your 50K and then polishing it up, you really want to focus on a very strong, tightly woven narrative and plot and character motivation, and with lots of built-in suspense and tension. So I've gone through, like, this book has a lot more potential than the other projects I've worked on, so I want to make sure I get it right, which is why I've focused on really polishing up the first 5 chapters before I go on to write the rest of it. I think that's going to make it stronger in the long run. I was going to say something else, but I forgot what it was. So anyway, this is the castle. I'm going to do a castle tour now and go inside the castle, but I'll make a different video. So if you are following me on YouTube, you'll be able to watch that. Thanks, bye-bye.